Hello, I'm Mike Buchanan, founder and leader of the political party Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them. I'm joined today for an interview of Debbie Powney with Elizabeth Hobson, an anti-feminist gender equality activist. Debbie is a psychology researcher who specializes in domestic violence from a non-gendered perspective. The head of department at the University of Central Lancashire is Professor Nicola Graham-Kevin. She spoke at an online conference we held last year. In fact, both of them did. The title of the conference being Domestic Abuse is a Men's Issue Too. Debbie is the driving force behind the initiative Walking to Recovery, a study for male survivors. Debbie, a very warm welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Debbie, what first led you to research male victims of partner abuse?
Well, I'm a survivor of partner abuse myself and high levels of coercive control. So, and a lot of the experiences I had in that are very applicable to male victims. But as a consequence of going through that, I made a conscious effort to talk about it with my friends, both male and female. And then they would absolutely tell me, oh, such a body's suffering from that. Can you talk to them? And it was as many men as it was women. And actually, it never surprised me because I wasn't in research at that point. But I got remarried, and I found myself in a situation where I had a little bit of money and some time to make some life-changing decisions. My father had actually passed away, and it was one of those moments where you reassess what you're doing with your life and kind of hurled full force into a midlife crisis, shall we say, hence the purple hair and piercings. But so my husband now, John, he asked me two life-changing questions. He asked me, what did I always want to do with my life, which had been psychology. And then he asked me what was stopping me. And there was nothing. It was only me. So I went back to university to do my master's degree in psychology with a burning question, which was, how did I get myself into that situation? Because I had a really normal, loving upbringing. My parents were always together. They had the normal ups and downs, you know, their rows and falling outs over trivial things such as finances and bringing up kids and the usual sort of normal, loving relationship. It was a traditional relationship. Both my parents were born either towards the back end of sort of World War II. So they had very traditional roles. My dad went out and worked hard. My mum stayed at home and looked after us. She was the driving force of the family. I have no doubt she was an absolute matriarch. But when I went back to uni and started to dig into the research, there was a huge amount of research, and I mean huge amount of research on female victims. But a lot of it was very led women to be broken, like women are these broken, fragile creatures. And once you've been in that situation, you're sort of condemned forever. And I didn't recognize anything about me or indeed my friends, male or female, that was reflected in that research. So that started me ticking. But then when I went to look for male victims, there was relatively scarce amount of data, and it all seemed to be the same researchers. There was a handful of excellent researchers, but there was a huge gap of like, so you're telling me that women are victims because they're of an accident of birth and that's them perpetual victims? Don't believe that. And you're also saying that men can't be victims or they're not as important. So I was very fortunate to be in a department that has rigorous research going on in all sorts of areas to make that research applicable. Our department is incredible. And I also was fortunate to be supervised by Professor Nicola Graham-Kevin, who is not just an expert, but a leading light in the field of aggression. And so when I went to her with my proposal, this wasn't a PhD that was already set up, it was my proposal. So I sat down and had a conversation with her. She does what Nikki's very good at, is she nods, she agrees, she disagrees, she kind of guides you into certain areas. But she said she'd take on my research, so that's what happened.
It's really interesting. So, I mean, can you talk a little bit more about your thoughts on the gendered narrative that's so prevalent?
I don't believe it, to be fair. And that's not just based on opinion, because again, I know a lot of friends and a lot of parents and aunts and sisters and various relations that tell me that men are abused in similar ways to women. But also, when you actually look at the research out there, the research goes all the way back to the women's movement, who are credited with bringing domestic abuse to the fore. But there's papers going all the way back to the 1970s talking about husband battering with Susan Steinmetz. And she released this paper and got absolutely denigrated. You know, I mean, to the something that we all nod at because we see it time and time again. But she was cast out and effectively left the field for daring to suggest that men could be battered by their wives. And that I critique the gendered narrative for a number of reasons, but I won't critique something that I haven't researched. So I've gone back into the books that were published at that time that were promoting feminism, and I can't find anything in there that gives me evidence that this is a gendered issue, other than we say it is. We subscribe to patriarchal theory, which is women are oppressed by men, and in methodology, if I can get that out, a framework is just a way of doing things. So you can apply any framework to any type of research, as long as you state what you're doing and for what purpose. So when I look at these books, and I'm talking about Dobash and Dobash, I'm talking about all sorts of vintage and often still cited text, it says this is based on patriarchal theory. We need to take this on faith. We need to recognize that women are oppressed, but there's no underlying evidence that says that. And then on the other side, I've got evidence coming through from Murray Strauss, from Donald Dutton, from all the people that we know, John Archer, who in academic terms would be my granddad, because he trained Nicola on her, she did her PhD under him. So we've got all this evidence, and I mean rigorous, solid, scientific evidence that shows that men are as likely, if not slightly more so, to be victimized as women. Yet it's just ignored, it's just brushed over. So I have a view that it isn't gendered, but that view is absolutely grounded in evidence.
And what do you think are the implications of the prevalence of the gendered narrative, though?
Well, I think it harms everybody. And I'll tell you for why. And I always put this down to sort of 5 groups involved in this. And at the moment, I'm talking about heterosexual relationships. I also think it completely negates the harm that's caused in same-sex relationships. But for now, if I look at heterosexual relationships, we've got 5 groups. We've got male victims, female victims, male perpetrators, female perpetrators, and children. So for male victims, they are utterly ignored. If you haven't seen anything about our new domestic abuse bill that's going through, we have a government department that is essentially ignoring the government's own statistics. So without any campaigns of the likes that we see for women, that has done a great deal about raising awareness for women to recognise they are abused, we've seen nothing for men. Yet still, 1 in 3 victims in the Office for National Statistics is a man. So why aren't we having the conversation that says our own statistics, without any campaigns, without any awareness being raised, 1/3 of the victims are men? Instead, all you see and all you hear is women are disproportionately affected. Well, of course they are if you ignore the men. So you've got male victims that are ignored. Female victims are treated like broken, fragile, perpetual victims, and it is not empowering in any way. Having a screaming person saying misandry doesn't exist, all men, kill all men, this, that, and the other, does not help a female victim. And I had a very similar conversation this morning. I was talking to a journalist where I said, I'm a female victim, and I completely understand why my perpetrator behaved the way he is. That doesn't mean I excuse his behavior, but I understand. He had childhood trauma. His father left the family. His mum was in trauma from that. His elder brother went on to use drugs and actually died from a drug overdose. So even if we just listen to that, you can understand why he was possessive, why he was controlling, not excusing it. And I don't ever want to share airspace with that person again, but there's a reason behind it. He didn't do that to me because I was born a woman. And if we don't start to allow women to understand why these things happen, female victims I'm talking about, how are they ever going to get over their victimization? Because they're told, and it's absolutely hammered into them from all the organizations that they'll come across, that men perpetrate abuse against women because you're a woman. So I don't agree with that. For female perpetrators, there are very few programs that can help them change their behavior and live without violence. And a lot of these women will no doubt have been through trauma, had adverse childhood experiences, maybe some level of mental illness, maybe, you know, something traumatic's happened to them in a previous relationship. And we're not allowing them to deal with that so that they don't have to use aggression and violence in a relationship going forward. We're not helping male perpetrators because the male perpetrator programs are based on a defunct and frankly useless model, the Duluth model, which is all about saying to men, you're wicked and evil and you shouldn't hit women. Now, we tell little boys from that age, don't hit a girl, don't ever hit a girl, no matter what she does to you, you don't hit a girl. So how are you going to tell a 30 and 40-year-old man, don't ever hit a girl? Because he already knows that. That's not treating the cause of those behaviors and the aggression, which again might be mental illness, adverse childhood effects, trauma reactions, all sorts of things, attachment, you know, abandonment, everything. We're not using clinicians and the right people for the right job. But finally, and absolutely crucially, there are children at the center of this. And all those elements that I've spoken about is letting those children down. It is leaving them vulnerable to repeated abuse.
And of course, lesbian couples, Debbie, as you know, have a very high rate of interpersonal violence. So it's also you know, female victims of lesbian partners, and I believe women are far more likely to be abused by a female partner than a male partner.
Well, there's data in the Office for National Statistics, for example, that shows that bisexual women have the highest rate of abuse. And there's going to be there's going to be elements that come into same-sex relationships about being outed, being ashamed to go anywhere because you might not have come out with your sexuality. There's all sorts of things going on there. But again, you're right, because we're ignoring female perpetrators and we're ignoring male victims. So how are we helping anybody? I cannot understand how a gendered narrative is helping anybody other than the people that are pushing a gendered narrative.
The only program I'm aware of, Debbie, you may be aware of others, but the only program I'm aware of in the UK for female perpetrators is that run by David Eggins and Denise Knowles for Temper DV. Because he can't get it accredited because it doesn't accord with the Duluth model, a bunch of lies. But
yeah, and that's something that I hear time and time again from people, that they can't get funding unless they sign up or subscribe to the gendered narrative, and they don't believe in it, which to me smacks of coercive control.
Yeah.
Indeed. I just want to touch on the media before I come on to the next question. Just want to touch on the issue of the mainstream media, which is something that really grinds my gears in this whole area. Elizabeth knows this. We recently tried to have a full page ad in the Spectator for just one weekly edition. I think it's about £7,000. We were going to do a crowdfunder, basically revealing some key truths about domestic violence. So we were drawing on the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge project, past 2013. And to me, one of the most extraordinary stats in that, and it was going to be in the advert, that I think it's about 60% of heterosexual couples, the violence is two-way.
Mm-hmm.
So at various times the man starts, and various times the woman. But in the 40-odd% or so where the violence is always unidirectional, the perpetrator is twice as likely to be the woman as the man. And to me, that's one of the most extraordinary findings in the whole of domestic violence research. But the female feminist editor of the UK edition refused point blank to publish advert without explanation. I sent an open letter to Fraser Nelson, the overall editor of The Spectator, unanswered. And this is a paper, Debbie, it's supposedly right of centre and most things, but when it comes to gender politics, it's up there with The Guardian, quite frankly. They've published more than 50 articles by Julie Bindel, who has basically made a career of 30 years duration out of lying through her teeth about domestic violence. It's really
I can't comment on whether Julie's lying or not, but there's I've asked that question time and time again, because to me this is so blatantly obvious that it's not a gendered issue. So is it a lie? Is it that they don't know because either they don't know or they're not looking for the evidence, or is it a filtered worldview? Because if I don't know Julie, and I would actually relish having a debate with her about this, but I can imagine that she's built a career on her feminist beliefs and the belief that domestic abuse is a gendered issue. So how could she backtrack from that, really, without breaking and shattering her worldview? It would literally be like telling a true religious person that there is no God.
Oh, it is. No, I mean, we all know feminism is a cult. But she actually was a radical feminist before going to university. I only found out a month or two ago. I think it was an article she wrote. So she believed this nonsense before even meeting feminist academics who. So no, you're right. She could know more. Yeah,
it's a belief system, and actually, I'm not sure. People always ask me things like, would you go and debate these people? Would you go and stand in front of them and give your evidence and stuff? And I truly believe it's pointless. I think there's I'm not going to fight in their arena. My view is that we just create our own arena, and we invite them to our battle, because ultimately, as a researcher, a non-gendered researcher, my entire aim is to reduce the likelihood and impact of domestic abuse for everyone. And if someone's arguing with me that shouldn't be the case, then that's on them. And that's shameful, actually.
Well, I can tell you, Debbie, that I have had the pleasure, that might not be the word, of debating with Julie Bindel, I think about 2012 or 2013. And in fact, the Durham University Feminist Society were going to picket the event, the members of which, by the way, are known as duffers, but obviously not to their faces. They were going to picket it, but it was raining slightly, so they didn't. In Durham, for God's sake. But anyway, but no, she accused me during my talk. She shouted out that I was lying about a particular point. And it was demonstrated to her that she was wrong. She apologized to me privately, but would never do so publicly. But anyway,
No,
that's more.
no, no, absolutely. But again, I think I've had a lot of visceral reactions to me as a person. Everything from calling me a misogynist and a pick-me to everything else. But some of them have been really quite aggressive and persistent and consistently abusive. All it highlights to me is that there are greater issues than I could deal with within those people. Yeah. But I fully intend to publish on this, that women are standing up for men and men's rights. And I'm not trying to be sexist in any way to you here, Mike, but women are standing up and we're coming together on this. And because we're doing that, there's a reaction. And the reaction is that as women, we are traitors, but we're not, because I haven't come across anyone within the non-gendered field that said, now everything should be about men and we shouldn't focus on women. In fact, the absolute opposite, where everyone's saying, I'm really glad you're doing this. What work are you doing for women? And when I talk about the work I do for women, not one person within this type of arena has ever criticized me. People have gone away and read it and come back and said, that's really good what you said about that. I think that's really good what you're putting forward towards women. The only time I get a reaction that is horrible is from other women.
It's a sad thing that female victims, I mean, they are, you're absolutely right, of course, Debbie. I mean, they're told they're broken. And it's the same with female victims of rape, that they're told they can never recover. They're broken. There will be until the day they die. What crueler message could you send? There's only feminists who do this, and no one in the world wants to keep women perennially anxious.
And it's not doing anything for the majority of relationships, you know, where you do have the mutual violence as well.
Absolutely, and
that is it there.
That, like Mike said, that's the most common form of domestic abuse, and we never hear anything about that. We never hear it. There's this conversation that says, what is it within these couples that is having an impact on their behavior? Is it do they have the same complex issues? Is there something that we could have a mediation thing for? Because a lot of couples recognize it. A lot of couples will refer to toxic relationships and things that sound familiar, but where do they go for help? You know, allegedly a report came out saying that the economic and social cost of domestic abuse to the UK is £66 billion a year. So imagine if we just took a fraction of that and said, we're going to start setting up mediation services for couples where there is bi-directional aggression that is having an impact on their health and well-being and their children's health and well-being. And my proposal for that kind of treatment would be that we decentralize it and we localize it, because there's nothing like having a community that understands, because most communities know there's a couple that are going through something. Or so what if it wasn't seen as something that was horrific and gendered? What if it was seen as something that actually we're humans and sometimes this happens and things can affect people that we can maybe work through? Well, you could have a whole change. A change in relationships. The divorce rates would drop. Children would be more secure. There would, I imagine, and I'm only speculating, the employment rate would go up. There'd be less need for things, because you know yourself when you,
Debbie, isn't it?
When you're in a secure relationship, everything else seems to follow. Everything else seems to be okay. You know, you feel more confident going out to work or going for a new job or something like that.
Yeah.
Yes, it needs to be tackled, but if it's as prevalent as everyone says it is and suggests it is and the evidence shows it is, why are we tackling it the way we are? We've been at this for 50 years and it's not getting any better.
No, because a lot of people make a lot of money. And in fact, I think the CEOs of the two major domestic violence charities have a higher salary than the Prime Minister. And they have done for 10 or 20 years, I think. Anyway, moving on, Debbie, to my next question. You've just released a report with Professor Nicola Graham Kevin and the Mankind Initiative What are the key findings of that report?
So this was across 2 surveys that I did last year with Nikki. The first one was on intimate partner violence, and then there was one on coercive control. And we took the coercive control elements from both of those studies, and it went international. So the report that we've got now is only based on the UK cohort, and altogether is 538 participants. And we used a tool that Nikki developed in her PhD in the first survey. And that's got a lot of elements of coercive control in that. And I'm going to tell you something in a minute that'll make you smile. And then we added to that in the second survey, that one has 24 items. And then the questionnaire in the second survey has 45 items. And the items that were added were taken from the data in the first survey. So there's things in there that are particularly of interest to male victims. So we asked about breaking of contact orders, trying to get access to your children, economic abuse, all sorts of things that were particularly, that came up as particular themes in our first survey. However, what the survey shows us is that men experience coercive control in similar ways to women. And then they have particular elements that are relevant to them because they are men. And the reason I'm so confident in saying that men in our survey experience coercive control in similar ways to women is that Nicola's scale, which is called the controlling behaviour scale, is based absolutely on the Duluth model. So all the behaviours in there have been tested on women, and we know that women experience them, and she's adapted them. She adapted them and tested it and factor and analysed it and all the rest of it in her PhD. And then I put that out for men. And then in the second survey, we added these elements that came from the first. So what we did is it's on a Likert scale. So it goes from never, rarely, sometimes, often, and always. And we took sometimes, often, and always as the percentage indicators, because that would indicate a pattern of abuse. Never and rarely, even rarely, it's not really a pattern of abuse. I wouldn't say that's a pattern of abuse. So to be absolutely robust, we took something that was sometimes, often, and always. And the rates were phenomenal. So there was things like 70% of men in the first survey said that their earnings were controlled. And we're often told that men don't suffer from economic abuse. Some of that was so severe that the indicators in the sort of open questions were so severe that men were literally being starved. And the reason they were being starved was because they were told what to eat and when to eat it, and when to eat it. And if they weren't allowed to eat anything outside of that because they had no access to money. And there was one guy that said in the data that you can get this app now from the bank that tells you absolutely every transaction that goes through your account. Yeah, so if it's a direct debit or you just bought something on your card or whatever, you can track everything. And so his wife had that on her phone. And if he went out, and I remember it because he absolutely said, I went to Pret a Manger to get a sandwich. And when I got home, there was all hell to pay. And she screamed at me all night. So I got no sleep and had to go to work the next day. So men are suffering from that. But then in the second survey, even things like sexual abuse, where we're told that this is something that happens predominantly to women. 1 in 5 of the participants in our survey told us that they were forced to penetrate as a pattern of abuse. So that's sometimes, often, or always. So there was things in there that came out that I hate to say it, but I would kind of expect. But then there was also things that were really quite surprising. And don't forget, these men know and recognise that they were victimised. So can you imagine what's happening to the men that don't recognise that they're being victimised? So yeah, it was revealing, to say the least. And the analysis that we've done on this is linguistic, it's statistical, there's all sorts of stuff, and we've literally only skimmed the first layer of it, and only for the UK cohort.
Oh, wow. So there are plans for further publications from these two surveys?
Yeah, so across the both surveys, we had almost 1,000 participants from India, and actually about the same for Australia. And then we had slightly less for America and Canada. So our next line of publications will be around Australia, and our top line data for just the top line, this is the percentage of men that suffered these elements, has already been put into the law review, because they're looking at getting coercive control as a law in Australia. And the data for Canada and US has gone into a Canadian review of coercive control as well. So for me, for all the time that we, you know, the blood, sweat and tears that we put into producing this, it feels like it's getting out there. It feels like it's getting in. And we're not saying we want all the attention to be on men. All we're saying is, you know, that big man-sized gap that you're ignoring, here's the data that fills that. We should be looking at men and women and families when we're addressing this issue.
And what about plans for further research generally?
Yeah, women as victims are important to me as well, as they are for Nikki and everyone else involved. So we hope to design a survey at a similar level for female victims, because I did a meta-analysis as part of my first study in my PhD, looking at post-traumatic growth in female victims. And the reason I did it in female victims is there was no information on growth in male victims, and that was what led me down this kind of path. But I used various measures and effect sizes that have been used on all sorts of trauma across a huge time scale. And that includes war, natural disaster, HIV, cancer, tornadoes, all sorts of different types of trauma. And I applied it to, collated all the studies and looked at it from a female victim perspective. And in effect size, all those other traumas that I mentioned, I think the highest kind of got to 0.3 on an effect size. It doesn't, I don't need to explain what it is, but so I'm looking wars, natural disaster, all the rest of it, disease. With the women, I found in my meta-analysis that there were some elements, protective factors that increased growth, and then some factors that decreased negative effect. So it effectively does the same job, just from a different angle. And the effect size for female victims, so they get more of a push to recover, was 0.36. It was the highest amongst all those different types of trauma, which leads me to believe we are not treating female victims correctly, because they do have the potential not just to recover, but to grow beyond that recovery. So we would like to do something similar than the surveys we've done here, to fully assess women's experience in coercive control.
And that's such a more positive message than female victims are getting now, you know.
Absolutely.
You can not only escape this situation, but you can become, you know, in your own estimation, better than you've ever been before.
I don't think you'll return back to what you were, because life changes as an experience changes, and there's nothing like trauma to change somebody. Yeah. But different doesn't mean worse, and sometimes different can be better.
Yeah.
So but the other thing is that coercive control is insidious and complex and layered, and it's a network of abuse. So what we've started to do in this report is to map out this network. And I've taken something as seemingly trivial as putting you down and mapped it against all the other items. So, and what it uncovered was, so putting you down can be linked to isolating you from friends and family. It can be linked to controlling your money. It can be linked to gaslighting you. It can be linked to threatening you with taking the children away. And I'd like to map that out, and we are going to do, for male victims, so that practitioners or even first line agencies such as the police can walk into a situation and hear a victim say, well, I'm forever being put down. And they don't just think, oh, well, my wife put me down today, just in a normal relationship. They can start asking questions that are relevant to coercive control. And I would like to do that now for men. And I would like to do that for women, because there is a gendered issue as far as men and women might experience this or express their experiences differently. But that doesn't mean that the trauma or the outcome is gendered. Everyone's suffering.
Or the injustice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you encounter, there must be hordes of feminist researchers in your field, Debbie. Do you encounter them, or is your university very much outside of that bubble?
I have this might surprise some people, but I have friends that are feminists, and I work alongside people that actually identify as feminists. I think what we have to be careful of is that we don't take the absolute sort of radical feminist and apply that to everyone, because I like to be challenged as a scientist. And if someone comes back to me and says, well, I think this is a gendered issue and I think it's patriarchal, I don't just immediately write them off because I don't believe in that. I think, right, okay, so what is it I need to investigate? What is it? Is there something I'm missing in my knowledge base? Is there something they can teach me? Or is there something I need to go away and find so that I can come back and take this debate further? So I'm up for a challenge. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's part of my scientific method, to get challenges from, as long as they're courteous and well-meaning.
Yeah, good faith.
Have you ever managed to do what no other human being on the planet has ever managed to do, which is to persuade a feminist to change their mind through rational argument?
I think there are, yes, I would say I have, and I see it more and more on social media. I think there are a lot of women that are what I would label, and it's not my label to choose, but just for my understanding, equity feminists that understand that they're fighting for equity for women, but they also understand that men suffer from certain levels of inequity. And I think sometimes, again, I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush, but there are even staunch feminists that have approached me, and I'm talking staunch feminists that have approached me and said, I never knew this, that I was never told this when I was on this course or in that training or everything else. Can I have some of your data? Would you share this with me? And it's heartwarming. It really is. I don't think all feminists are the same. I don't think all, whatever label MRA is attached to, are the same. We all have extremes, and we all have people that are out to do good in various elements.
But I think you'd agree, Debbie, that the feminists in the positions of power are not equity feminists. They're all radical feminists. And one does wonder, what exactly are equity feminists fighting for in Britain in 2021? I cannot think of one area that they could be fighting for legitimately.
Well, no, but I mean, there is also that group identity, isn't there? That people like to be part of something because it's been part of something. It's for whatever reason it is. I do think there are radical feminists that are absolutely aware of what they're doing, but I do think it's a vested interest, whether that vested interest is financial or credibility, what they consider to be credibility. I'm afraid I don't function on that level, so they can do whatever they like. As a researcher and as a scientist, it is my job to find gaps in our knowledge and plug them. And in domestic abuse, the biggest gap of all is male victims, and it really shouldn't be.
Thank you so much for all your work. It really is.
It's a pleasure. I can't thank you guys enough for the support that you give me throughout this. It's incredible. And again, I will say this time and time again, for all the stuff that the men's movement and you guys and everyone else associated with it, I do understand that there's radicals in every group, but I've never been persecuted. I've never been questioned. Even when I talk about female victims and the need to support them, I've been fully supported all the way through it. So thank you everyone for supporting me. It's been unbelievably good.
It's one of the things that people struggle to believe, that there is virtually no misogyny in the men's rights movement.
Well, I find it strange that they believe that when most of the people I first came across in the men's movement were women.
Yeah.
So I find it quite extraordinary, actually, that this group is classed as misogynistic. Yet, and again, I'm not trying to diminish you in this, Mike, but most of the leaders that are really leading this field are women.
Yeah, I think we all recognise the amazing contribution that women have made to the men's rights movement, and that's a contribution that is just simply growing with year after year.
It does appear to me to be sort of ironically quite misogynistic as well, though, because there's this, but they have internalized misogyny, those women, or they're just doing what these men tell them to do. And, that's what the feminists are saying about us. Yeah.
Or we're doing it for men's attention,
Yeah.
Like, really? I've spent all these years and all this money and all this time just trying to get someone's attention, sat in my little house in the middle of nowhere. There's easier ways to get men's attention. Isn't it called OnlyFans or something?
Yeah. Debbie, Debbie, thank you so much for your time. You're an inspiration to so many of us. Thank you for a fascinating interview. And I echo what Elizabeth said. I wish you every success, and we look forward to hearing a lot more from you in the future.
You will, don't worry.
And it's a wrap.